Hello and welcome to your Minitab lesson for Chapter 8. Today we're going to be looking a little bit at different ways you can create different samples. Some of them are going to be very simple using simple random sampling methods. And then the other one I'm going to do is some stratified sampling. So inside of doing the simple random sample, I'm also going to talk about whether or not you should do replacement. Well, specifically, I'm going to do that with the second example. So if you look at the Minitab document attached to today's lesson, you'll notice that I've coded everything up top with what you would use if you were using Minitab 17 or 18 and what you would do with Express. So if you forget how to do this, like the code keys are up at the top and much easier to find than what I've done previously. I'm doing obviously Minitab 18 and I will do a separate video for Minitab Express if you're viewing this one first. Go to the other one if you're planning on using Express. And Express does look different if you're using a Mac or a PC, just a little bit. So these are the code keys for what you might see. So this first example we're going to look at, I have this little image of people that have different characteristics. Some of them are blue, some of them are black, and some of them are red. So we're looking at color as being the characteristic we're interested in sampling from. And the idea behind using a simple random sample is that everything or everyone or every characteristic, if you want to think of it that way, that's present in a population is equally likely to be selected. That's why we like random, because no bias is introduced. Everything has the same likelihood of being chosen. So as you can see here, I have 30 individuals and I want to create a simple random sample of all of them. So how I'm going to do that is I'm going to actually give them a numerical characteristic. So I'm going to assign them an identifier 1 through 30 based on their position here in the image, and then sample from that identifier population to select my sample. So I'm going to be choosing a sample of size 9 and of my population of 30. So the first thing I got to do is create my unique identifier for all of these individuals. So I'm going to assign each person a unique number from 1 to 30 in Minitab. In other words, I'm going to create a column with the numbers 1 through 30. So this is going to be, I'm going to call it ID for identifier. You don't have to name these, but I like to just to keep track of what I've been doing and where the data came from. Otherwise, when you look back at your notes, it might not make a whole lot of sense. Okay, cool. So the first thing I need to go do is make my pattern of data. So I'm going to go up to Calc, down to Make Pattern Data, and I want a simple set of numbers. Cool. So I'm going to tell it where to store my data, and since I just named that column, I'm going to be using ID. The first value that I want to have is 1 because I want to start at 1. This is going to be my first person, and then my last value is going to be 30. And I'm doing that in steps of 1. So the step size is telling me how big the next value is going to be. So if I start at 1 and my step size is 1, the next one will be 2, and then it goes up by 1 because that's my step size, 3, 4, and so on and so forth. And then it asks me how often do I want each of these listed, and once each, and number of times to listen to each sequence is just 1. So if I wanted to do something that maybe started out looking like 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, I'd want them each to be listed multiple times. I would actually put the number of times I wanted them listed here. So if I wanted to do like every single number 3 times, I would make this a 3, just as a note. And if I wanted to make that sequence repeat itself, so say I wanted 1 through 30 and I wanted it twice, so it went through 1 through 30 and then 1 through 30 again, I would actually change this number, the number of times to list the sequence, to twice. We don't want that, we just have 30 individuals. So we're going to go ahead and hit OK. And there you go. There's our numbers. And you can real quick check to make sure, yes, it is going to go through 1 through 30. So I've started out by doing my first part correctly. I've got each of my values in there once for each of my individuals. And now I need to select my sample of size 9. I like to label my samples ahead of time. So I would usually like either just use an S for sample, but usually I also will list what size it is. So sample of size 9. This is just a note. When you go to sample things on your own, it's not a bad idea, especially if you're sampling something and it has multiple characteristics that you're interested in, that you list that it's a sample and then its characteristics. You don't confuse it with the original data. Alrighty. So how we do a sample in regular old Minitab is we go back up to Calc. It's kind of funny that all the sample stuff is in Calc when you might think, oh, it should be in data. That's the same mistake I make if it's you. Um, and I want some random data, and then I'm going to sample from columns. All right, and since I want a sample of size 9, the number of rows I want it to sample is 9. And then I got to tell it where I want to sample from. the ID variable. And there I want to store my samples into. All right, and then this last box is that sample with replacement box. And remember, sample with replacement means that once someone has been selected to be a part of the sample, they get put back into the mix and then they can get sampled again. So if you're doing individuals that are like humans or something like that, it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense to put them back into the sample to be selected again. Or you could end up with like, so say you were doing a survey and you wanted to select a random sample of your classmates to give the survey. You wouldn't do replacement in that case, simply because you might end up giving the same survey to someone 3 times, and that would make no sense if they got selected in your sample 3 times. Anyway. So we're not going to check this box. I'm going to give you an example a little bit later on a time when you might want to do so. Go ahead and hit OK. And so here's my random sample. So I'd want person number 25, which is right here, number 29 right there, number 11, which is up here, and then oh wait, that's not number 11, number 10. Like, you'd go through and you'd pick out the individuals that match the characteristics that you were interested in that had the sample. Cool. So if instead what you wanted to do was to stratify your sample, okay. So if I'm looking at my, I'm on number 3 now in case you've been keeping track. Sorry, I started to talk about stratifying and I meant to do this first. If you look at each of these individuals, you'll notice that I have 3 unique strata, blue, black, and red. And each strata has 10 members. There are 10 of each color. So if I wanted to make sure that I had an equal number of each color being represented, I should sample accordingly. So in this case, what you would want to do is instead do samples of each size after assigning each of these members the numbers 1 through 10. So what I should do, oh, I made this too far over. Sorry about that. Or sorry, too close. I want my blue, my black, and my red. And the idea is that, okay, I'll assign the blues numbers 1 through 10. So this would be number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you get the idea. And then I will need a color identifier to go with that goes through 1 through 10. So I want to go back up to Calc, make pattern data, and I want a simple set of numbers. I'm no longer doing ID, I'm doing a color ID, and there are 10 of those, not 30, so I got to change that to 10, and then I'm going to hit OK. So now what I want to do is I want to repeat the step number 2 where I select a random sample, but do it of size 4 for blue, black, and red. So you go back to Calc, random data, sample from columns, and I want to sample 4 rows, and I want to do that from the color ID column, and then I'm going to have to do it several times. Once for blue, and then repeat that for red, or am I on black? I'm on black. And then once for red. I keep hitting stat because that's the one we use the most. No, I want to do red. And that's how you do it if you were stratifying against a certain characteristic. So if you were interested in doing something like this and you wanted to have equal rating and comparison, one of the reasons you might want to do this if there's a characteristic that you already had that you wanted to make sure you get counted for. So if you're comparing like accommodations for rental properties, or not rental properties, but for places you could stay, and you had 2 classifications like hotels and motels, and you wanted to randomly select samples from both of those, you should separate them out into 2 groups, hotels and motels, and then sample from each of those to get equal representation from each group. So in this case, like I was separating out by color and then random selecting from each color. So notice for the blue group, I'd get number 1, number 3, number 10, who's my last guy, and then number 6, that guy. So whoever those individuals might be. Cool. So that's how you would do stratification of your sample. So notice you'd have to do that separate grouping, re-enumerate based on the characteristic that they have, and then sample. So I promised you an example that would require you to not use replacement. So like if you were thinking about when and when you should not use replacement, and if you had something like, I don't know, a bathtub full of M&Ms and you wanted to make sure that you got an equals representation of all the colors of M&Ms that were present. You wanted to take samples from there. Whether or not you did replacement wouldn't matter, simply because the population in that case is so big. But with this example, the very tired professor, you really should do it without replacement. So, in particular, if you have a very tired professor who has 10 keys on her ring, or his ring. I did do her. Okay. And they've locked their office door and they need to unlock it. Should they go through with replacement or with not? If you did with replacement, that means as you select a key and try it, even if it doesn't work, you put it back into the sample to try again. And that just does not make any sense, because that means you might be trying the same key 3 or 4 times that you already know does not work. So you definitely shouldn't replace in this case. So that's it. That's all I have for you for today. In your assignment this week, you will be sampling words and looking at their length, and you will have to look at the number of letters in each word to calculate their length. So just be aware of that.